Federalism is the argument that is center stage in this coronavirus pandemic. And Dr. William Rosenberg is here to give us a little lesson. He is a professor of political science at Drexel University and tweeting at DR as in Dr. B. Rosenberg. Bill, welcome back. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning.
It's not a new debate, but tell us how, where it comes from and what it is that people are fighting over.
Well, the basic concept of federalism is that there's a sharing of power and responsibility between the national government and some form of regional government, whether it's states or local governments. And this happened at the time of our founding. There was a big discussion when we broke away from England about what type of new government we ought to form. And they came up with a system called with a unitary system, which was called the Articles of Confederation, which was also dubbed the weak league of friendship among the states. They only allowed a system that required all states to agree if something was going to happen on the basis of the national government, and really only gave them the power to conduct foreign affairs, to conduct a war, and to print and coin money. After the revolution was over and we were operating under this for a little while, it became evident that this was simply not practical. And that's why we formed a new federal constitution that laid out in greater detail the power specifically of the national government. This has been something that's been both a wonder and also a great harm over our last couple of hundred years, because depending upon the issue and how it's applied, it may either be a good thing or a bad thing. Letting states decide how things are going to go gave us a lot of terrible situations, particularly when it came to segregation in schools. But on the other hand, it also allowed for a lot of innovation. It allowed states to test out new ideas and see whether or not they could improve the lot of all Americans.
I've seen it happen. Obviously, we saw it with the Civil War. Something even more interesting, and from an emergency standpoint, I go back to the fight over the effort to help Louisiana during Katrina, and the governor at the time was having a fight with President Bush, a fairly public fight, and he was insisting that the governor had to call for the National Guard to come in. He couldn't just authorize that. In other words, we saw Dwight Eisenhower call in a National Guard in 1957 in Arkansas. So the question is, over time, what the federal government has the authority to do as opposed to the states. How is that especially a problem right now during this fight against the coronavirus?
Well, the little audio clip that you played was an interesting one, but it was only one of several that you could have chosen to reflect how President Trump used the role of the national government. At first, he said, well, he nipped this sort of virus in the bud. There's only one case and it's going to go away very soon, sort of dismissing the issue. And then as the issue became more and more of a problem, he began to assume a role that he was in charge and that it was up to him to decide how all of this was going to play out, and he had the leadership to do it. But it was almost like there was a whispering in the back room that said, Mr. Trump, if you're going to be in charge, you're also going to be responsible. And that famous line from Harry Truman, that the buck stops here, was an inverted line where Trump was arguing that he was in charge, but he wasn't responsible. Other people were responsible for the failures that caused what was occurring, and it was up to the states, particularly the governors and mayors, to decide how they were going to solve the problem, because he didn't want to be responsible if it didn't work out. So this has been a back and forth that's gone on each day, really, when we see the morning press conference of Governor Cuomo, the interviews with Governor Murphy or Devine, and then you see the evening broadcast by President Trump. There's sort of two different worlds that are being presented that don't really reflect a high degree of commonality.
Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University. Bill, also there is a question about whether or not the federal government might occasionally take actions that punish states that do not fall in line, if you will, even if the states have the authority to do what they do. If they don't do as the federal government wishes, can the federal government punish those states?
Well, we saw this, I guess, about a week ago when President Trump raised the question about whether or not he was going to give out large aid to states that allowed for sanctuary cities. where sanctuary cities and immigration comes into this debate about providing masks and respirators and stuff fit in terms of the supplies that are needed is really a very weak link. I mean, it's really hard to imagine. But yet we see that leaders often take advantage of grabbing for power when some type of crisis comes up. All you have to do is look internationally. There's the Prime Minister of Hungary, his name is Viktor Orban, who is doing exactly that. And he's doing it in a legal constitutional manner, although it's really very frustrating for leaders around the world, where he's saying basically, I want to rule by decree, and I want no time limits on what I'm doing. And he got 2/3 of the parliament to agree with that. So a democratic process was used to empower a national leader to basically do whatever he wants for as long as he wants. And I think that's sort of the danger that not only is the European Union sort of addressing, but democracies all over the world.
Is the U.S. model of a republic different from every other country? Are there any parallels to the way we exist compared to other countries and how they would use that constitutional authority, whatever it is, for their countries to deal with the pandemic?
Well, it's kind of interesting when you look at politics. It depends on the angle that you approach it. On many ways, the idea about federalism and sort of working out issues is something that has been routinely supported by both Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. But when the rubber hits the road and people see what the impact of certain types of decisions on these federal versus states issues, it becomes much more complicated. And I think that's where sort of the idea about polarization in our country is really kind of present. When I look at the map that keeps being shown in the media, and I'm going to suggest the true, real media that suggests which states are opening up and which states are not. There's almost, not entirely, but almost a perfect correlation between conservative states that are opening and more progressive states that are sort of continuing to shelter or be safer at home. The idea that we have a divided nation is very much playing into this. We're seeing people, for example, in Michigan going to the state capitol with guns in hands, rifles, to sort of advocate for the opening of the economy. And I would note that apparently it's legal to go to the state capitol with a rifle. A lot of people in many parts of the country would imagine that simply wouldn't be the case. But nonetheless, it's intimidation, and it sends the wrong message. It doesn't send a message of cooperation. It really sends the message of intimidation.
Meanwhile, in California, for example, we're seeing thousands of people go to the beaches, and we've seen that play out in New Jersey as well, and some of the beach communities a little farther south. One wonders, what exactly can states do in a situation like that? I mean, do they go out and start mass arresting people who are on the beach?
No, that's certainly not possible. I remember hearing a speech by Supreme Court Justice Breyer about 3 years ago when he said that when the Supreme Court makes a decision, they have to make sure they don't get too far out in front of the public, because if they do, they have no one that can really enforce the laws, particularly if the president is not in the same space as they are. We have to recognize is that, there's constant pressure in every state to have things more open and also to have things more closed. There's not a lot of states where it's almost unilaterally everyone is for the same position. In many ways, it becomes kind of an individual issue about how one wants to approach this. And, when you were talking about states, Governor Cuomo is opening up the economy for example, for construction, but not in New York City. He's sort of saying that areas of the state that have low infection rates are going to be able to do that very soon. Mm-hmm. But on a personal level, I'll just share with you and your audience, I'm a very mediocre golfer, and the golf courses are supposed to be opening up, and I would love to go out there and play golf right now. But having people that are in at-risk categories in terms of age and health status, I'm simply not going to do it. And I think what we have to recognize is that while most Americans, 8 in 10, are in favor of still continuing the shelter in place, there's a lot of people who are not. And what I'm doing personally is I'm going to stay isolated for a little while longer to keep my family safe. maintain social distancing, wash my hands. And in most cases, individuals can make that decision unless they're a worker in a factory who's being compelled to go back to work. And I think we have to be careful because this whole issue, and I'm glad you're having this discussion today about federalism, has long really been an experiment, but we have to really hope that it doesn't kill us, and we have to make sure that we're staying safe and not doing anything to risk the deaths of unnecessary individuals in terms of unnecessary deaths to individuals.
And by the way, staying off the golf course will help your blood pressure too, I guess, from what you're saying. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it does.
Bill, thanks so much as always. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Stay safe. Dr. William Rosenberg, Professor of Political Science at Drexel University. Thoughts on federalism? Tweeting at DRB Rosenberg, at DRB ROSENBERG.